Hello, all. Welcome once again to another in a series of multiple podcasts where Artin and I discuss various political issues internationally and home here in the UK through a multitude of perspectives and views. We talk about what led up to these moments, the events themselves, and what may happen in the future because of them.
Basically, viewers, we talk a lot because somebody had a good idea. By the way, did you know the podcast was renamed? So we've decided to have the expert interviews called The Briefcase, and these ones just called the Astovar Baldock interview. You know, personal branding. You know, we're marketers and we love our personal brands a lot. So yeah, personal branding. Keep a note of that. See, these are good tips for everybody at home. So yeah.
I'll keep them in mind, they're good. Right, so neatly starting off, we have something that's been, I'd say, bouncing around the news. I feel like people have been viewing this very surface level. You know, they just sort of looked at the issue, gone, well, this is what we have here. We want to look deeper into that. We want to look at the causes of the issues. I'm going to explain what it is. Okay, this segment is known as the Crying Chancellor. Now, this week, as you know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I know long words annoy you, Thomas, but they annoy me more. But
Pronounce for once. Well, anyway, yeah. Rachel Reeves. During the Prime Minister's questions, she was seen with an emotional outburst. She was crying, and this incident, in fact, came up amidst a challenging political backdrop, and it included a significant U-turn on welfare reforms. Now, her team has stated that it was due to a personal matter, but reports have also surfaced a preceding tense exchange with the Speaker of the House, and all of this has sparked a debate about public display of emotion.
So Thomas very brilliantly just explained the backdrop to this whole debacle. Tobacco. Don't do tobacco. Anyway. So what had me quite interested about this is, you know, we always tell our politicians, be more human, stop being such a ragged, old, blank, grey wall, stop being so plain and bland. And of course, when somebody shows a display of emotion, you're not being a grey, bland wall anymore. You're being a much more emotional wall. So, and especially in the context that this is the Iron Chancellor. So the Iron Chancellor, you know, she's always portrayed herself as being very solid, very, you know, unmovable. And this, I think, really brings up a few predicaments for her. On the one hand, as I just said, we tell our politicians to be much, much more human. And showing emotion is being much, much more human. It's being much, much more personal with voters and with the UK economy. The UK, not the economy. Well, you can be personal with the economy, but with the UK voters. And it's sort of being honest as well, isn't it? You know, all humans have emotions from time to time, and you're showing a bit more honesty. On the other hand, there's this weakness narrative, and I've seen this with a few, especially right-wing platforms, where they have been saying, oh, this is the Iron Chancellor, she's meant to be tough, yet now we're seeing her being weak. We're seeing her not being able to hold up under the immense pressure of politics. And she really does have the world on her shoulders right now, you know. She really does have all this economic pressure on her. Labour's not had a good few months. Or in fact, even since the election, quite a few things have gone wrong for them. And, you know, I can 100% sympathise with her. Just a small caveat there. This could truly be a personal matter. And if it is a personal matter, you know, I do feel sorry for Rachel Reeves, and I really hope it's just politics, because, you know, we wouldn't want anything bad, of course. But, you know, this has, I think, quite big implications. I don't think, realistically, long-term implications. You know, Tony Blair,
amidst political history. It's something to sort of look back at and wonder okay, this has implications. The thing about it is, as you say, we all bleed the same blood, right?
Yes.
Homeless people, university students, politicians, is basically what many people are getting at here. Yes, some people say, well, yeah, I know that she has a lot on her plate, but really, is she apt for the role if she can't handle that pressure? I like to view this more of a sort of straw that broke the camel's back, really. I believe it was that tense exchange previously that did it for her. I don't believe this is a moment of weakness. I believe it is a breakdown after many, many stabs to the heart. It's been a challenging time for Labour, especially with her role, plenty of responsibility that she has to succumb to.
Yeah, I think there's one tangent to that. Is that I was discussing this with Professor Anand Menon. We recently did a podcast with him. Not out yet, viewers, but it will be out soon. Maybe by the time this podcast is out. And he was really talking and getting to the fact that we were discussing the matter of the far right, but he got to the fact that this current economic situation, not even a magician could fix it. No matter what you do, it will take time. It will really take time, and the whole world is facing this currently. It's not like the Tories were pretty awful. However, there are some good civil servants in government, and they're the ones that really are trying to keep the ship together. Of course, under the very executive power of the Chancellor, whether it may be currently Rachel Reeves or in past some Tory Chancellor. We had the good old roundabout of the Ferris wheel, really, of Tory Chancellors coming in and out. But, it will take time. And I think the press and the media and the public are being quite unfair, aren't they? Towards these chancellors. The Tories, I understand why people voted them out. They were incompetent at the best of times, and they really, we had Boris Johnson, we had Liz Truss, we had Theresa May, we had Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak was all right, but then by the time he got on the ship, it was already sinking. Yeah. He was just sort of a caretaker to see things out and stabilize things before Starmer could get in. But yeah, that's my small little tangent. Just be a bit more fair to these politicians. I know we need to scrutinize them as much as possible, but the fact of the matter is, no matter how you look at it, these economic situations need time to heal. There's no magic bullet. The public needs to understand, if they are impatient, we will get a situation. That's what's happening in America right now, where we have a president in America who's enacting very authoritarian moves, who's using his power to his own personal benefit.
Actually, this is, this mess right now is built with the foundations, the very foundations of political exploitation. This brutal austerity, this mindset that, we're going to do this because we can, because we have the willpower and the capabilities to do so. So why not do it? People are cracking down this sort of viewpoint these days, especially since the days of Thatcherism, of course. And now we are seeing a more human side to politics. You thought of Thatcher, she was known as the Iron Lady, I believe.
Yeah, the Iron Lady.
The Iron Lady, unmovable. Unmovable in the force of political power and, personal problems. In fact, Reeves, her issue has been labelled as a personal matter, right, by her team. So of course, everyone goes to the team because, they're the ones that you want to hear the reason from. They are sort of the voice of reason in this. They are practically the people who know Reeves the best. Okay, now, of course, many people are drawing connotations from what this personal matter may be, and if this matter will in fact have long-term implications. No one really knows, because it's difficult to say what the personal matter actually is, and due to this, it's uncertain to what extent of time the effects will have until we actually hear, possibly from Reeves herself, what the issue actually was.
Yeah. I was just watching PMQs again just earlier today, and what was so interesting is how Baldock responded. First of all, just to say, she's actually quite getting better in PMQs. Initially, she was very horrendous. Now she's only slightly horrendous at PMQs. She's getting better at asking questions. I think the problem is when she gets rambly and talks a lot, she sort of ties her own bow of despair. But when she asks nice, sharp, short questions, it's actually quite good. But when Rachel Reeves was sort of breaking down and Starmer was talking, and Baldock brought in the matter of the economy and the U-turns, and then she pointed out that Rachel Reeves is looking miserable, and she said it twice. She said, Baldock said that she's miserable, she's looking miserable. That's what she said. And is that the right response for the leader of the opposition? Is that the sort of thing you want to see?
I suppose this call out of emotion can be seen as belittling and demeaning rather than a sort of, it's not a play on.
I think it was quite cheap.
Yeah, absolutely it was. It's not a sort of diversion to go, oh, actually, look, we're upsetting people here. What we've done has affected people. We're showing the human side of politicians. They are showing how, their opposition folds under pressure. It's not kind at all, frankly.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, with the way our political system is, especially first past the post, it's actually quite interesting. When you have situations when you have runoff voting, such as in France and a sort of similar system in New York City, you have a situation where candidates are quite kind to each other and opponents are quite kind to each other because you have to rank people, and kinder politicians get more votes. But when you have first past the post where there's only one winner and there's no ranking, we find that politicians are more polarized and the base is more polarized. So that's a little thing for more democratic voting. So anyway, last thing on this, I think long term, Thomas, you just pointed on the fact that personal matter could be short term or long term, but how about the effects on a public image? Will this invoke a change in Rachel Reeves' team to show a more human side, or will she keep with the Iron Chancellor showing?
I'd say the dependency on whether people will vote for a person all lies on reputation, of course, as it's been, has been the case for many years. And so the way that media outlets have dealt with this is intriguing. For instance, I anticipate what the Private Eye should have to say about this. I imagine the front covers will be very interesting. Any sort of satirical outlet really will have a bit to say about it, especially with social media as well.
Lord have mercy for Daily Mail viewers.
Yeah, precisely. So as for long-term effects, I feel as if we live in a world where everything is digitally reported, every little aspect, whether that is a massive U-turn or or just a politician breaking down in the middle of Prime Minister's questions. So I feel like in the grand scheme of things, this is a very trivial matter that not many outlets will bother to pursue, frankly. I feel like it's definitely an interesting point to go back to and go, oh, actually, well, remember this time when politicians for the first time showed a human side, but it's not something which would probably have a long-term profound effect. But regardless, it's interesting to look back to.
Do you think it will become a trend for politicians to try intentionally to show a more human side? Like what, some lower level congressmen in America I've seen are trying that sort of perspective, but I haven't really seen it in the UK yet. Do you think it'll...
Well, some politicians in the UK make a very poor effort. For instance, Rishi Sunak trying to...
Sky TV!
right? Yes, like the Sky TV, the whole fiasco. Sort of everyone could sort of plainly see through that. I'm not entirely sure what he was attempting there. And Boris Johnson too. He himself has tried to sort of show his human side, and that worked.
Yes, it did.
The man is a genius, regrettably. However, he shows his stupidity. Well, I say stupidity, it's merely a facade.
Yeah.
He went to a top university, wonderful parents, amazing education, and yet he acts like an entire numpty, right?
Yeah.
People see through it, others don't, which is why he eventually became prime minister. And
I think this sort of,
by the time people saw who he was, it was too late.
Yeah, I think this sort of buffoon part of politics is very concentrated in populism as well. Do you think Farage should try it?
I think Farage, he sort of had his work cut out for him with the cameos from the young generation, saying brain rot terms, as the generation calls it.
Editor, please pop one of.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I can pay him money and he'll say whatever he wants, He can say all these funny words that I've heard on TikTok. So really, he is human.
I genuinely thought they were deepfakes the first time I saw them. Let's move on from all the crying and buffoons. Universal UK's UK invasion. I'm not sure who wrote this agenda. I think it was me. But it's good. So Universal, they've basically said we're coming to Bedfordshire. We're going to invade Bedfordshire and build a brand new major theme park resort in Bedfordshire. It's said to be one of the largest in the world, the first one in Europe. It's a multi-billion-pound project secured with government support and now in the public consultation phase. The PR and marketing challenge is immense, building excitement, managing community relations, and positioning it as a must-visit destination when tourists come to the UK eventually. And in a very, very competitive market, I'll have you know, we have Hyde Park, we have all of London, and mind you, Bedfordshire is not quite too close to London, so it's a decent travel. So in order to entice tourists and obviously domestic market in the UK to come, I think there'll be some big challenges for them. Obviously, it helps that they are the first one in Europe. We have no competition with anywhere else in Europe, so it will be an international hotspot, most likely, if they don't mess it up. So of course they have to start from scratch, which gives them a good opportunity here. They do have one in Miami. Or is this Miami? It's somewhere in Florida. It's a massive one, by the way, absolutely massive. You literally, when you're in there, you can see to the end. Massive one. You can't see to the end, sorry. I think they need to engage with community. They need to address concerns and they need to win hearts and minds. Where they're building this, it's quite interesting. It's like old industrial estate. It's very interesting. And do you think they'll face any, right now there's some debate with Thames Water in the UK. They're trying to build reservoirs, in fact, quite near where I live. They're trying to build reservoirs quite near where I live. And there's been quite a lot of protests for years to prevent them from building these reservoirs. But actually it's in the public consultation phase right now after the government vetoed the council. Do you think we'll have a similar sort of situation with Universal, or is the old industrial estate just, they don't care? Because, there's, for local residents, it is the fact that traffic will be immensely increased. It will become a much more touristy part of the UK, most likely. And there will have to be new infrastructure, which will most likely be disruptive for the local community. On the one hand, it's good for the local community since they will have a very big influx of money. Jobs will be created and it will just be very good for the local economy there. So do you think people will see the long-term aspect, or will they just say, oh no, we're having tourists coming in, let's go protest?
This isn't the first time that people have complained about a theme park, or any other attraction for that matter being built and having an influx of tourists around the space. A similar thing to happen with Alton Towers, for instance. As the years have passed, there's always been at least one who lives nearby and goes, this isn't fair, I'm trying to sleep. You know, I can't even hear my alarm through that blare of, absolute masses. Yeah, it's in terms of just the general population in the UK, they probably see this as a good thing.
Yeah.
We're finally getting some Western influence, because as with theme parks attraction in the UK, the sort of golden theme of it really is that they're all one-of-a-kind theme parks, no chains, no franchise. This is definitely a first for the UK, right? So it's interesting to see how people will approach this. I don't know. I mean, many people seem to favour the idea and just sort of are oblivious to the fact that this may have environmental and social side effects due to it. As far as many are concerned, the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah.
Like with any tourist attraction, there will be an influx of people. Things will get busier and messier, but we'll also have people to deal with these messes, right? Obviously jobs will be created and reduced. More money, which is, as everyone knows, is great. So,
So they're adding a new runway to Heathrow, and I remember at the time when they were first, the government obviously overthrew the council and tried, do a very nice coup d'état of the decision, and they obviously forced the new runway, and the BBC was covering the local residents and the concerns they had. Of course, they will be building on their houses and they will have to move. And, they portrayed it quite as an emotional way, as journalists often do. And I think it didn't really help the government because, the government, it's such a thing with Starmer's government. They are so poor at messaging. They did, again, just as with Winterfield, they failed to properly outline and show the public the benefits of a Heathrow runway, the benefits of an additional one. And obviously here, I don't think the government will be blamed. I think if there are concerns, the responsibility will lie with Universal.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a very corporate matter, I'd say, especially considering this is on outside terms as well. The government doesn't have too much to play into really. Yeah. It's just sort of another example of international business.
Yeah, which is good news for, of course, the Starmer. How will Universal market this attraction to the UK and to the European audience? They might try to leverage a lot of the intellectual property they have. Minions, many very good, very classy, of course, very classy films, and with real artistic integrity most of the time. 2022 writer strike. Yep, go ahead.
Just got to mention that. I mean, the whole deal is very symbiotic, right? You have more jobs, more money entering the UK, alongside Western influence, which will improve Universal's image. This is quite a big achievement for them. Now, the means by which they'll accomplish this is uncertain. I'm not sure what approach they'll go for. I don't know if they'll try to appeal to the UK by sort of implementing franchises with largely UK appeal in their attractions, like certain movies, TV series that they have the ownership to that, apply to the UK, or perhaps they'll want to, go for it purely Western style. They want to show, we're still the same old universe that you always love. It's just that we're here in the UK. This is just...
Yeah. I think a big thing for them to play into is the sort of nostalgic and the sort of historic and the sort of brand presence of Universal. The great IP they truly do have some massive IP to leverage. And I think it's going to be a combination of trying to invoke that sort of sense of nostalgia with their films, because so many people watched them growing up. They really did. And they should leverage that, and they should leverage their massive IP. Put Minions in your face when you're advertising it, really big and bold. And not concede any sort of cheap headlines, not concede anything like that. Don't concede any Daily Mail sort of, discount holidays. They should really, I think, target the premium market when it comes to this sort of thing, because people are willing to pay a premium price.
I am sure that the United Kingdom was chuffed with this, really. It shows that Universal they solely believe that the United Kingdom is worthy of them to implement one of their outlets. Basically, they think the UK is worthy of having an attraction. They think it will generate mass success, which a lot of people are pleased with, especially the government as well. It's doing wonders for their image of both, the heads
Deal
of state
maker Starmer.
Yes, exactly. I'm not entirely sure how much credit can be attributed to the Prime Minister. I feel like he'll just sort of sit back and go, yeah, that's me. Well, I run the country, so this is basically all on me.
It's a cheap win. It's a good win for him. It's a good win. It's an easy win for him.
They do the work, He watches the builders pile up the RAAC, right? That's his day done, really.
I think the US deal, just on a side note, the US deal, the Europe deal, the India deal, and now this deal with Universal are 4 very easy wins for Starmer. Realistically, if we're being pragmatic, the India deal's good. It is actually fine. Doesn't do a whole lot. Makes alcohol and whiskey cheaper for Indians. Good. Should have a good impact on exports in the UK. They love this sort of thing, apparently. And the America deal, very surface level. It basically exempted the UK from tariffs. Didn't do much else, which is a win since Europe didn't manage to do that, or at least they did it much later, and the rest of the world hasn't managed to get a tariff deal. In fact, I think Vietnam just did it yesterday or this morning, but countries really are struggling, and the UK was the first one. Good win for Starmer, but doesn't really change much. It's not the sort of thing that the Tories were chasing when they were in power. The European deal is good. It does a few things, such as the e-passport gates in airports and something, but there's obviously no free mover and nothing big. Again, 4 cheap wins, 4 easy wins, but Starmer should really try to leverage these wins. I think that he can sell it to the public. He can really sell these 4 wins to the public. He can really show. Yeah.
All he needs is just a pair of warm, welcoming hands. Really.
Yeah.
Then that's him done.
Yeah, if he, I think he isn't doing enough to show how much of a winner he is in this sort of sense.
The very minimal work that he has cut out for him. All you need to do is say, America, you're here. Welcome to the UK. We'd love to have you, basically. And that's, him done, Yes, I'm not sure how much we'll see of Keir talking on the matter of Universal establishing themselves in the United Kingdom. Perhaps, in his point of view, here's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah,
perhaps he believes this matter doesn't concern him.
Yeah,
I believe it does. I believe it has minimal effort, really. He doesn't need to integrate much.
The thing is,
into this. Look at it and comment on it. I mean, after all, he is a representative of the United Kingdom. I believe out of anyone, he is the most important person to talk on this matter.
Yeah. The thing is, just one note before we get to the next segment. He's not doing well on the economy. Or at least, to be fair to him, I don't think you can do better on the economy. You can certainly do much worse. But realistically, it's just a thing that time will heal. Foreign policy he's doing good on. He's seen as a statesman. And if he can simply, divert attention from his domestic failures by selling himself as a statesman to the public, by showing, hey, I managed to get these deals done. The Tories didn't manage to get these done, even though this is a weaker deal. We managed to get, these massive, great deals. We're doing the Silicon Valley project in Oxford and all this great thing. And he's just not doing that. He's just not selling his wins. Which, I'm not sure what's going on with his advisors.
We'll see. Sooner or later, if he doesn't put in that effort, sooner or later, something will catch up to him, and he'll be overburdened.
Yeah.
We'll see. Time will tell. Right. So, would you say that concludes segment number 2?
Yes.
No ending points? Would you say that?
I think that's good.
In that case, we jump onto the final segment of this episode. Now, as you know, last weekend was the BBC coverage of the annual Glastonbury Festival. I mean, I say annual. I don't believe it's actually running next year. I believe they have a fallow year to allow the fields to heal, pretty much, due to all the tents and trampling and camping, which is obviously fair enough. See you in 2027. Now, 2025. This was a very interesting year. Okay, I believe this is built up on actually many previous years. We've seen things like this before, but up to no extent as this, right? And this can be all, backtraced to Israel and Palestine. Now, Bob Vylan and Kneecap, okay, 2 bands, they're performing on stage. BBC covered them, as you do with Glastonbury, as per tradition. However, I believe it was Bob Vylan who conceived a death to the IDF chant, and that led to a public apology. Also, I believe Kneecap, or at least a few members of Kneecap, were arrested due to their comments and performance. Now, the actual coverage has been reviewed, by the authorities, in fact, and it sparked mass debate, really, about, not only editorial standards, whether the BBC should actually showcase the entire coverage, but also about impartiality too. Not just the image of the bands themselves, but the image of the BBC and their, partaking in it. Them allowing to show this footage, right? And how they ought to handle politically sensitive content in the future. I mean, did they know this is going to happen, basically, and should they take precautions? I mean, what's your stance on that?
I think as a small, backdrop to this, there's mass disapproval between government policy and what the public wants to happen in Palestine and Israel. Obviously, there's a completely horrendous situation, aren't there? Completely ghastly, honestly. And government policy has been, let's support Israel, however, at the same time, sort of walk a tightrope where we are also sanctioning some of senior leaders in Israel. And obviously, this is still the public think you're not going, they're telling the government you're not going far enough. And Bob Vylan's saying death to the IDF, when he said that, that's just a amalgamation, really, of what's been happening with public perception, with the public. And yeah, very, very direct. Good PR on him, or it's a massive PR win for Bob Vylan.
I mean, nothing else but you can only infer one thing from that, and the public definitely did.
Yeah. And massive PR win. I had no idea who Bob Vylan was, and now I do. For better or for worse, it's a PR win for him. For the BBC, it's a complete car crash. Honestly, a complete car crash. What the BBC guidelines say is essentially you should not be airing this sort of content, which is ironic since they're journalists. And, also the thing with Kneecap, he got arrested. Two of the band members got arrested, and now there's an active criminal investigation going on to the members regarding anti-Semitism and various other hate crimes. My view on this is from a sort of policy and perspective, really. The BBC, seriously? You broadcasters, you're meant to be broadcasting this stuff. You're meant to be broadcasting the public. That's the whole point. You're the British Broadcasting Corporation. You're meant to be showing real down to ground. And this is not some niche event. It's not some extremist event, is it, Thomas? It's Glastonbury. It's literally Glastonbury, and you're meant to be showing what your citizens are saying, whether it's right or wrong.
Exactly. It's as recently as they've shied away from exhibiting certain things, which definitely questions their idea of impartiality. I remember, in fact, last year, I believe it was last year, then Idols were playing. They're one of the last acts of the night. Now, it was after, I'd say, 10, 11 o'clock. Everyone is in the crowd, cheering, clapping, screaming. And then they begin a chant. A few cuss words, so I shan't repeat verbatim what it said, but it's basically against the king and the monarchy, right? Interesting enough, I didn't hear too much about it. Sure, it was in, it was in the tabloids the next day, but I believe this year what's different is the BBC's decision, of what to do with it. We've seen plenty of voices. We've had plenty of voices talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's very prominent. It's very hard to avoid, in fact. But what makes it interesting is just how the BBC have dealt with this. Despite their preceding reputation of remaining impartial no matter what, and just their sort of scope, really, I imagine. Their image of showing things for what they are and nothing else, basically, just displaying what you see, right? Through the lens of a camera, through the view of a person, but they failed to do so. Bob Vylan and Kneecap, both of their sets are unavailable on iPlayer. That was as soon as they were showing the television, just gone now, nowhere to be seen. And obviously, hasn't heard people talking about them. I think it's really interesting how they've dealt with it.
Yeah, I think there's an irony, because I was watching Prime Minister's question, not Prime Minister's questions. I was watching the ministerial comments and ministerial statement by the culture minister on this matter. I didn't use this word lightly, but I saw hypocrites in Parliament when the ministerial statement was happening. They were bothered with why BBC didn't pull down the stream. But you're saying the BBC has somehow a bias against Israel, which may be true or may not be true, but it has nothing to do with taking down the stream or not. The fact of the matter is, this is Glastonbury. It's a big event. You have two very prominent artists. They're saying some things. Why is it up to the BBC to decide whether they take it down or not? They're the national broadcaster. They should be broadcasting what's happening, not what's against Israel, right?
Precisely. I mean, you also have to think about, of what interests do they have for removing the coverage? Because, millions saw it anyway, right? In the wake of recent scandals that have been revealed, it's been shown the BBC have a very, nothing to be seen here kind of approach, right? That's their main interest. For instance, with Savile, right? They knew he was a beloved treasure, and that's one of the main reasons why, they didn't want people to know about the things he did. Now, of course, that does not excuse their actions at all, but it is one of the main vital reasons. They wanted people to be oblivious and naive to these events. However, with Palestine and Israel, people have seen these events, in the form of interviews, images, all sorts of coverage, right? This is nothing new. Of course it isn't. People are bound to talk about it and mention it at the Glastonbury Festival, right? Millions attend. You've seen as well people waving the flags of Palestine in the crowd. In fact, the BBC have also tried to censor those. Any footage where those flags are visible, they have cut out from the broadcasts.
Which, I think it's just blatant censorship. I think there's another aspect to this, which is Glastonbury itself. And Glastonbury knew this would happen.
It's true. For eons, they've been used as a political platform.
Yeah. And people are saying, well, you shouldn't have allowed Bob Vylan on stage. What Bob Vylan said is, in my view, not okay. It's not okay to say those sorts of things. However, not okay is different from being criminal, and I don't think what he said was criminal. Maybe not okay or not. I think there's an unfortunate part for Glastonbury. I think Glastonbury is a loser here, since brands don't want to be associated with this sort of stuff, do they? They really don't.
Famous people for music now. It's beyond music. Politics has been the main sort of, I'd say artists saw an opportunity, basically. They knew millions would be watching and they saw it, that's for both Bob Vylan and Kneecap. But it's also interesting with, people saw how these artists were treated. Then they also took a look at Rod Stewart. Now, Rod Stewart, in recent Nitro events, he has been found to be supportive of reform. Okay. However, the BBC, they said nothing about this. I have Glastonbury really. So he was on the pyramid stage, I believe, on one of the weekdays. Now, it's interesting to think if he were to verbally express his beliefs of the reform policies on stage, how would the BBC treat that? Because this whole thing about death to the IDF, it may be in the interests of political warfare. Perhaps the BBC doesn't, they don't really feel like they want an altercation with Israel, right? Whereas last year with the King, that's a purely internal affair, right? You're always going to have hatred of the monarchy. That will always be eternal. But this is new. Perhaps they want to avoid this new, fresh conflict that can be birthed from a festival being shown on television. It's a new modern age we live in where music festivals can be used as political.
Yeah, no, I think I would counter that point. I think it's not a new age. Going back all the way back to Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, and even before that, I think festivals were used as good old. 1965 was a matter of musical debate, but it's been used, against militarization, against warfare, against all sorts of stuff. Just
very, powerful medium for a long time. But just, with not only the power of the festival being televised, but also the power for the BBC to go, actually, no, we're not showing that, we're cutting you off.
I think it's quite unfortunate. Yeah, I think it's a sensitive matter for people. And the PR implications, I think here, just to conclude, Bob Vylan is a winner. Not because of what he said, I do not endorse what he said at all. But he's a winner in PR. People...
Really, yeah, it's seen as a very bold move for him to get up and millions, not only at the physical festival itself, but also at home. He knew well and clear everyone was going to hear what he had to say. Even if the BBC decided to remove that.
Yeah, I think Bob Vylan's a winner here. A winner. I think Kneecap, they're winners here. BBC, they're losers, no matter how you look at it. No, what they, if you're on the side, they should have broadcast it. They did well. They apologized for broadcasting it. They're a loser with that caucus. If you're the type of guy that says they shouldn't broadcast it, they're losers with that caucus. The only caucus they're not losers with are those living under rocks. So,
yeah, it's a bit of a tobacco for the BBC, frankly. They have two options. Do they either remove what people have to say,
or double down?
Yeah, which may cause sort of political tensions and debate, or do they follow their blind ignorance of these events and go, well, it's just what happens, it's Glastonbury? Do they continue to do that?
I think that's what they should have said. However, there's also the aspect of editorial guidelines. But I think if I was their PR manager, what I would have said to the BBC, and if I know I've got a few connections in the BBC, so if you're watching this, you guys, and Sky News, I have much more connections in Sky News. So if any of you Sky News people are watching, listen, next time this happens, really listen in. If this happens again, okay, what you do, okay, you say it's Bob Vylan's fault. That's what he said. We're simply broadcasters. Our job is to show what's happening. It's not up to us what happens. It's our job to show what happens. We're journalists. Okay?
Leave it how it is, really, you know. I'm just showing this, you know, nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
He said it.
He said it.
Tried to get involved.
We've been showing Glastonbury for literally 50 years, okay? For decades. We've been showing Glastonbury for decades. It's not up to us what happens there. It's up to us. We have to show it because it's our job to show it.
You know, it's tradition, you know. I mean, they sort of inserted themselves into hot water, you know what I mean? They stripped off their clothes and dived straight into, you know, the hot tub, right?
I think the apology was stupid.
But, you know, that's the only reason people are talking about this. They don't care that, you know, you started the chant. You know, Glastonbury for decades has been used as a political medium. It's just this is new. What the BBC have done is new. That is the new part, right? Them deciding to take action and go, actually, no. You know, you can talk about anything but that, which has really sort of reflected their image of, you know, impartiality. You know, it's intriguing to look at, and I wonder how things will fare, you know, in the next couple of years in Glastonbury.
Yeah, I will link down the Times of Israel article on this. I think it's quite interesting. But yeah, that's all from me. And Thomas, is that all from you, or do you want to keep ranting about this?
Yeah, I was ranting about this. Yeah, it's an area of expertise. Well, so it's expertise, but definitely interest. Yeah. You know. Yeah, on a final note, yeah, I personally have seen Bob Vylan myself at a smaller festival, though. So you know, it wasn't, you know, not international. It wasn't national coverage. I just wonder where they'll go from here, really.
Yeah, I think Bob Dylan has some very good ammunition. I think the BBC's flat on their face. That's a good note. That's a good note to end on. It should be the title of the podcast. Bob Vylan. I'm not sure. Bob Vylan has ammunition. BBC is flat on its face.
Yes, bit of a mouthful. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
Yeah.
But you know,
I haven't listened to Bob Dylan songs, so I don't know. Anyway, thank you for joining in on the Astovar Baldock or the Baldock Astovar podcast. Whichever way suits you. Yeah. Well, to be fair, if we're going alphabetical order, then you know